bring absolute assurance to you that you're in. And really, in order to understand that, you kind of have to understand what they call the whole counsel of God's Word, or all of the Bible. Today, I think we're going to look at a story that is going to give a lot of us some assurance on this. So what I'm going to have you guys do is I'm going to have you do a little exercise with me, because this is going to be tough. I'm going to need you guys to repeat after me. Okay? Because I'm going to screw this up a bunch of times, so we're going to do it correctly a few times. So I want you to repeat after me. We're going to say the name Mephibosheth. Can everybody say that on three? Mephibosheth. 1, 2, 3. Mephibosheth. Okay, we'll do it again a little slower. Can you say Mephibosheth? Mephibosheth. Okay, all right. Now it's okay if we screw that up, because we've gotten it right a few times. I was like going, I have no idea how to say this name. I've practiced it, and I said some curse words on accident. Dropped the H at the end and was like, oh, no, mofo, whatever. It was just it was tough for me, but I got through it. Mephibosheth, whatever. We got it. So we're going to look at Mephibosheth, and he is a guy that has an amazing relationship with David. And are any of you familiar kind of that story of Mephibosheth? Okay, one of you. Great. All right, so me and you, we're tight. Okay, so we're going to look at this story. And in order to kind of really get some background on it, I'm going to kind of get you up to speed on David and his life. So basically, in a nutshell, it works like this. There was Israel, the chosen people of God. God called them to be a nation, brought them into the land, delivered them all this stuff, and God was kind of ruling the land as a theocracy. He was in charge, and the people were looking around with everybody, and they had all these kings and things, and the people were like, we want a king, right? We want a dude, God's like, you really don't? And they're like, we do. And he's like, okay, I'll give you one. So he gives them Saul. God appoints Saul to them, and then God, shortly after that, kind of turns away from Saul, because Saul turns away from him. And then David is anointed as a future king. He's just a little guy. And then David comes along. He kills Goliath. You guys know that story probably. And then David and Jonathan, which is Saul's son, become BFFs. They're super tight, good friends. Then Saul gets angry because he knows that David's going to be king. He wants Jonathan, his son, to be king. And he's like, I'm going to kill David. So he wants to kill David, tries to kill him. But Jonathan, his BFF, warns him of Saul's intentions, and they get closer and closer. And then Jonathan and David make a pact. And I want to read that pact to you. It's in 1 Samuel. That's not where we're going to be tonight, but I'll read this pact to you. Jonathan saying to David, he says, may the Lord be with you as he has been with my father. If I am still alive, show me the steadfast love of the Lord, that I may not die, and do not cut off your steadfast love from my house forever. When the Lord cuts off every one of the enemies of David from the face of the earth. Okay, so there's this pact made, and this is going to be very important for us later, where they're like, hey, we're tight, and really what Jonathan is saying is what's currently kind of the cultural norm was, when you took over power, if there was anyone left in the prior king's lineage, you just killed them. Because you didn't want them kind of snooping around and getting in the way of things. So they're out. And he says, look, don't do that. If I'm still alive, if my son, and he doesn't have kids yet, but he says, if my family's still around, be kind to them. Don't kill them. And David agrees to that. Saul continues to hunt down David, and David looks at Saul as the anointed of God, and actually has a couple of opportunities to actually kill Saul, but he doesn't. He restrains himself. And then we see Saul and Jonathan were killed in a battle at Mount Gilboa. And David is appointed the king of Judah. Then Jonathan's son. When David is appointed the king, the nurse, Jonathan's dead, Saul's dead, and the nurse of Jonathan's son, who's now 5, is like, oh no, I got to get this boy out of town. She doesn't know about the pact, so she picks him up and she starts running away with him and somehow drops him and cripples him. Okay? So now you have this crippled 5-year-old. Now David, it takes years and years and years. He's the king over Judah, then becomes king over Israel, and there's all this passage of time, about 16 years, and it takes him to bring order to Israel. And then we come to 2 Samuel chapter 9, and if you guys have a Bible, open to that, and we're going to see really something fascinating. And it says this, and David said, is there still anyone left of the house of Saul, that I may show him kindness for Jonathan's sake? Now there was a servant of the house of Saul, whose name was Ziba, and they called him to David, and the king said to him, are you Ziba? And he said, yes, I am. I am your servant. And the king said, is there not still someone of the house of Saul, that I may show the kindness of God to him? And Ziba said to the king, there is still a son of Jonathan. He is crippled in his feet. The king said to him, where is he? And Ziba said to the king, he is in the house of Machir, the son of Ameliel, at Lodabar. Then the king David sent and brought him from the house of Machir, the son of Ameliel, at Lobar. So here's what's going on. And I'm going to need to give you a little definition of something here in a minute. So David, it's been like 16 years since he's been made king. And he goes back to a promise that he's made to Jonathan, that he was going to show this loving kindness to his family if there's anyone existing, and not kill him. So at this point, he finally has control, order to Israel, and he reaches out and he says, hey, is there anyone left? And he hears about this crippled young man, and he says, bring him to me. Now, the definition that you guys need to know, and this will be critical, is where he talks about showing this lovingness, this kindness, or this loving kindness to Jonathan's family. And if you go back into 1 Samuel and Jonathan asks for it, in the Hebrew, it's hesed, okay? It's hesed. And what this means, and this is critical, it's not love, okay? You'll see it sometimes, it'll be interpreted as love. It's not. It's kind of like loving kindness, but it's not an affection. It's an action. It's a commitment to care for someone. And again, caring not in the affectionate way, but to actually engage in someone's life, to draw them to you, to hold on to them. And actually, in the Old Testament, we see it in some places. David refers to it, like in the Psalms, as his refuge, where he cries out to God for his loving kindness, and we interpret it as refuge. So it's a covering. It's a kindness, but it's very active. It's very engaging. It's very, there's almost an ownership of it. This hesed. Okay, so King David says, who is it then that I may provide refuge for? Is there anyone here of Jonathan's family that I can provide refuge, that I can provide a kindness, that I can bring under my control of care? Okay, not that they've earned it, not that they've done anything, but I am wanting to take ownership of this person by providing care for them. And so they bring this young man. They bring him there, and we're going to see in verse 6 that, it says they bring Mephibosheth. Any of those names will work. They bring Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan, son of Saul, and he came to David and fell on his face and paid homage homage and said, and David said, Mephibosheth. He answered, behold, I am your servant. Now, again, culturally, Mephibosheth should have been very afraid. He was probably thinking, here I am, he's dragging me out, he's going to kill me. And David, he falls on his face and he's like, behold, I'm your servant. And David says to him, do not fear, for I will show you the kindness for the sake of your father Jonathan. And I will restore to you all the land of Saul, your father, and you shall eat at my table always. And he paid homage and said, what is your servant that you should show regard for a dead dog such as I? Then the king called Ziba, Saul's servant, and said to him, all that belongs to Saul, or all that belonged to Saul, and all that is his house, I have given to your master's grandson. And you and your sons and your servants shall till the land for him, and shall bring in the produce, that your master's grandson may have bread to eat. But Mephibosheth, your master's grandson, shall always eat at my table. Now Ziba had 15 sons and 20 servants. Then Ziba said to the king, according to all that my lord the king commands his servant, so will your servant do. So Mephibosheth ate at David's table like one of the king's sons. So this idea of Hesed, this loving kindness, this refuge, we're seeing two things. We're seeing, first off, there's this incredible commitment that comes with it. That there's this ownership, this taking responsibility, providing protection, providing materially. It's an absolute care. Again, different than a love. Different than a love. I mean, you can love someone and go, Ben, I love you. You can see someone on the street and you're like, dude, I love you. And they're like, cool, because, I got kicked out of my house and I lost my car. And you're like, oh, let me pray for you. That's a bummer. I hope that works out for you. Love you, dude. And you're off. This Hesed, when you have this Hesed, this loving kindness, refuge, commitment, you're like, Ben, here's my car. Stay in my home. Eat my food. There's a commitment. And then there's this idea of sacrifice that comes with it. This Hesed, it's like not only are you going, hey, I own you, but you say, what? And it's not that ownership like a slave ownership, but it's like, you're a part of me. And so everything I have is now for you. So David, as he takes his kingship, he says, everything that was Saul's. Okay, now who was Saul? King, right? What would have been Saul's? Okay, do you get this? David doesn't go, oh, hey, Mephibosheth, whatever. Why don't you go ahead and, take, the nice corner house there in the cul-de-sac and we'll call it good. What he says is everything that was Saul's is now yours. And what he says to this crippled young man that would have been a cultural outcast is not only is everything that was Saul's now yours, I don't just give it to you as kind of like an albatross, something that you're struggling with. Because let's be honest, if Bob here, if I was like, Bob, and Bob was crippled, and I was like, dude, Bob, have no legs. Here's a motorcycle. It's for you. I want you to ride it, enjoy it. You can have Toby's bike. It's yours. Bob's going to be like, sweet, I can't use it. I don't have the ability to take care of it. So this Hesed sacrifice that we see that David gives not only says, hey, I'm not only taking you as my own. He says, I'm sacrificing to you, and I'm not just giving to you generously, but I'm giving to you sacrificially because